Okay, so welcome to my talk, which is about cultural studies and creative industries. My name is Sophie. I'm a lecturer at King's College London in digital marketing and communications in the Department of Digital Humanities, and my research looks at the feminist political economy of creative content production contingent to social media platforms. So at the moment, I'm working on two projects, one looking at discrimination, which is enacted by brand safety ad tech in influencer marketing industries, and one looking at the use of targeted advertising by women and non-binary people who are artists and creative practitioners. So I was really struck by a couple of the points that were put forward by Robin, Meredith, and Will in the Against Platform Determinism blog post on Data and Society points. And I think these are some of the guidelines for our discussion today. So questions included, how do we avoid fetishizing the power that platforms possess and a mystical view of platform power? How do we not overstate the value of media tech? How do we seek spaces for co-option and solidarity and analyze those spaces? And how do people, places, and institutions shape platformization? So I think that we don't need to look forward and develop our own theoretical enclaves to kind of address these problems. We can look back and we can think about cultural studies as a place that provides a lot of the tools to help us answer some of these questions. In particular, I want to talk today about the model Encoding Decoding, which was published by Stuart Hall in 1973, originally, of course, to address broadcast media. And I think this can offer one pathway for avoiding the fetishization of power of platforms in our work. For Stuart Hall, power relations at the point of production only loosely fit those at the point of consumption. So in other words, he advocates for considering media beyond just a behavioral input. So media isn't the same as just like a tap on your kneecap, which generates a specific bodily reaction or makes your leg fly up. Instead, we can look at the encoding decoding model, which offers a theoretical roadmap for how media discourse is translated into practice. And I think this is what we're concerned about today, how meaning is articulated and how it's put into practice through media. And we're also concerned about, as Hall puts it, how news and culture become staged. How do platforms facilitate and embed deeper logics of individualism in society across a variety of social contexts? So the model begins with the institutional structures which give the context for platform production. In terms of platforms, this can be their institutionally embedded design, algorithmically enabled news feeds, the categorization, prioritization, and moderation of particular themes and topics. So the model asks us who works for and at platforms, what's their training, their social background, their assumptions, politics, understandings, and their individual and institutional imaginaries and constructions of audiences. How do all of this milieu get baked into platform design? So this is a rudimentary reading of this model for the sake of brevity, I have to say. But at the far end, on the other side, we have the function of audiences. Concentrating on processes of decoding shows that platform content can engender dominant or fixed ideological readings, but on the other hand, as Hall puts it, more active and situational ideological readings, which arise from individuals' own roadmaps of social reality. Hall cautions that audiences' understandings can be contrary through their own frames of reference, but ultimately they're bounded by the hegemonic social, cultural, and political context. So for me, it's interesting that what could be positioned as dominant or preferred readings of content becomes so much more complicated in the case of social media platforms. Who architects a preferred reading? For example, is it engineers, is it designers, oversight boards, or content producers? Each of these actors and intermediaries have their imagined preferred reading in a platform context, but they don't cohere. Content producers are subject to moderation, shadow banning, or cautionary labeling, for example. Maybe it's the clashes in preferred readings here that are particularly interesting to investigate. And because of the very real limitations in undertaking research on platform social life, so maybe more importantly, or most importantly, a lack of access and scalability, our research does not adequately address the endpoints in the encoding decoding model. like at the moment, we tend to languish in the middle. How can we undertake more comprehensive political, economic, industry-focused work that also fleshes out our understandings of audience practices and meaning making? So, cultural studies dovetails with critical feminism as it seeks to redress accounts of media which ultimately position viewers as passive victims of media's deceptive and harmful messaging. And in so doing, cultural theorists look beyond analyzing media as text, rather than looking at audience engagement with media as practice. So we're looking at this kind of practice here. This approach has grounded some of the most interesting and illustrative works on contemporary concerns related to platforms such as disinformation. For example, Alice Marwick's 2018 paper, Why Do People Share Fake News?, brings together cultural studies with science and technology studies and those kinds of approaches to advocate for a socio-technical approach that highlights the roles of actors, messages, and affordances in the spread of problematic information. Marwick argues that while platforms do play a role in amplifying partisan content, often because it sustains engagement and clicks, algorithmic peaks of popularity don't exist in a vacuum. Users share problematic information and fake news to signal their identities and loyalties because it confirms deep-seated feelings that they already have. Stories take hold due to their emotional resonance rather than their accuracy or veracity. They're shared and they come alive through online engagement and offline discussions, which are in turn underscored by feelings of passion and pleasure. So in putting together this presentation, I was really reminded of a question that one of my supervisors asked me when I was writing my PhD thesis, which was on the British beauty vloggers producing content for YouTube. One of my central arguments was that rather than using YouTube, a new tool at the time for media production and participation, to produce a widespread range of media across genres and topics, women were frequently producing media that was tightly bound across commercial lines. These lines were animated by platformization, so they were at once material, but also anticipated and imagined. The women that I was studying were using YouTube as an attempt to sustain a living and pursue good work and a good life. But the way that they were using YouTube was very restricted. My supervisor would ask, what are the pleasures here, both in producing and consuming beauty content on YouTube? And I really don't know. So I can very competently explain the anxieties that producing this content sustain, which were augmented by entrepreneurial and individualized natures of platform work and animated by precarity engendered by algorithmic visibility. But the pleasures then and kind of now still escape me, but they must be there. Like no one's forcing you to make or watch YouTube videos. So I think that could be one place that we can look at pleasures enabled by platforms and beyond functionist conception of pleasure as like a simple need directly filmed by daily media consumption. So we need to look for the rich, complex, and contradictory ambivalence of pleasure, which might help us move beyond platform determinism in our work and in our media engagement. And in this vein, this is my closing question. How can we expand our research method and objects to look at institutions and audiences and account for pleasure in platform production and consumption? Thank you.